Our third meeting. And the topic of the meeting is the protocols of the Elders of Zion. We will divide our time into the following things. First of all, listening to the protocols is not easy. What? Really? Well, I will talk right into it now. Or gold? Well, we will start with obedience. Then we will try to define what the protocols are. What is it? Then we will try to describe them in terms of their appearance, that is, the compulsion, the structure, and also the content. We will talk about their origins, how they were created from a kind of source. And then we will explain their spoils, that is, how they are being published. What is their background? Where did the idea come from? Why did the idea actually come about? Some examples of famous protocols and the influence of famous protocols. And finally, question 1, what to do? The question is, what to do if there is anything to do? And sir, here you have a place here if there is anything to do. And last but not least, are three elements, the crucifixion, the election, and the character. What will happen to them when we reach this new era? So, today's program, and I will immediately open with two quotes, and both are by Thaler. One is already in the first edition, or let's say, one of the editions of the first edition that were published in Munich. In 1925 he writes like this, it's page 600 or so, you know, man Kemp is really long and tedious. Really unreasonably deep, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which are so deeply hated by the Jews, clearly and uniquely show how the entire existence of this people is based on one continuous lie. These documents are Hitler's writing. These documents are the result of forgeries. He quotes, sighs, and cries out, the Frankfurter Zeitung newspaper every week again into the world. We will talk about this, that is, about who spread them and within the framework of what to do about those who claimed that they were forgeries and in what way. Therefore, Frankfurt wanted a serious ghetto with him from the beginning. He claimed that it was a forgery, but Teller doesn't care. He says that the fact that the newspaper cries it out every week again into the world is the best proof that they are indeed real. When this book eventually becomes the common property, the Jewish danger will be eliminated. I want to come back to this. When this book eventually becomes the common property, the Jewish danger will be eliminated. The Jewish danger, that is, the book, can be a weapon in the fight against Jews, and there are more wiretaps from him a few years later. In 1932, he is having conversations with a man we have already quoted from, Hermann Raus Chaining, the president of the Senate in Danzig, an educated man, a man from a respectable family, the Zola family, and Hitler trusts him. And, let's say, reveals his plans to him. And he tells him about the protocols. He tells him this is how we are in 1932, that is, 7 years after, and Hitler shares Roskenning's experience of reading the protocols of the Elders of Zion with real turmoil. I read the protocols of the Elders of Zion at a time when this was the dangerous secrecy of the enemy, from which there is no room for escape. I immediately took the view that we should wait for the thing to happen, as we do in our own way, of course, from those who are close to each other, meaning we will wait. We are close to each other. And we will wait for what they are doing. We are close to each other. And yet, what are they doing? What the Jews And hence also the value of the protocols. No. Hitler will not respond with any shout. It is absolutely impossible to overestimate the Jews as an enemy. It is absolutely impossible to overestimate the Jews as an enemy. But I said, like the Frankfurter Zeitung in the previous quote, that it is obvious that the elders of Zion's fur is fake. I learned to know this back in 1920, and even then it was clear to me that it could not be true. We will talk about that too, that is, we talked about the chain of events and those who tried to prove that they were fake and why Hitler did not come to rule in anger. He does not care. This is the main sentence. He does not care at all. If it is true historically, he is not interested in it. If so, the protocols are not protocols. Even if it is not true, the inner truth convinces him sevenfold. The inner truth convinces him sevenfold. And so on and so forth. But these are the main sentences. Next time we will discuss Nazi ideology and mention, but only briefly, of course, the protocols because we are discussing them today. But the obedience. These two quotes, one earlier, one later, show how this publication is at the basis of his thinking. Stood at the basis of his thought regardless of whether these things are true or not. Now, I would like, as stated, first of all, to clarify what the protocols are. The protocols of the elders of Zion are a plot. That is, they are a publication that is above the Jewish people as if they still have a structure of tribes. This is another word. This is a small plot. They still have a structure of tribes. And each tribe has an elder or two, that is, a head of a tribe. Or two. In anti-Semitic literature, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries, it is very common to present the Jewish people as they were in the days of the Bible and after them in the days of the First and Second Temples. That is, it is as it was. It does not progress, does not change. And the plot says, as stated, that there are 12 tribes. Each with an elder or two, a head of a tribe, and they gather every 100 years in some hidden place, usually towards the end of the century, and plan together what they will do in the next century. Now, what is the purpose of the experiments? The purpose is to fulfill a comprehensive master plan, and the plan is, over the next 100 years, to manage to destroy and undermine in the world what they did not manage to do in the previous century or in the centuries before that. That is, it actually follows this plot. It has been going on for centuries. And in the century when all this is fulfilled, when the end of time comes, that is, everything they want to destroy will be destroyed, then they will take over the world and the kingdom of the house of David will be re-established. Now, this is the plot in brief. I will return to the details, the structure, etc. Since when? In fact, or let's say, when do the elders of Zion sit? At the end of the century, a meeting that serves as the basis for what happens in the next century? The key point in all the first protocols is the First Zionist Congress in 1897 in Basel. In other words, the plot says that a non-Jew infiltrated the Zionist Congress and no one knew who he was and what he was, and he wrote down from their mouths. There are other formulas that he did not write down. He really managed to take the protocols of the Congress and the meetings, and here he comes to the world to hide from them the terrible danger, this secret that the Jews keep, and the plan. This master plan, the plan of destruction and takeover. Let's go back to that. In the end, you will know that there is no small compliment here to the Jewish people. This means that we have not leaked anything for hundreds of years. Our leaders are successful. The people gather again, everything is a secret. And not only that, but it is organized, it has a plan, it is orderly, it is disciplined. Well, in any case, this is the plot. Another thing I need to add here in presenting the matter. In presenting the matter, what are the protocols? We said supposedly the protocols of the First Zionist Congress. Yes. Herzl is the father of the conspirators, and also others who appeared of course at the Congress. And the protocols are supposedly the annals of the Congress, but not really what was at the Congress, but the plan for takeover. Another thing that needs to be added is that according to the story, this plot is all planned. I mean, the Jews cry that they are in exile and they are in a terrible situation today. But that is not the matter. The exile is part of the plan. Why do they say charity? They quote there the first English version. They quote, for example, Weitzmann, who said, God did charity to us, who were scattered among the nations. This is a completely different matter in Judaism, of course. This is what role the people of Israel have in the nations, but here it is charity done to us. In the sense that there is a plan for the exile, it is intentional. The people of Israel are scattered among the nations on purpose. This is what he means, from within those countries, from within those places where they are. We are trying to destroy and take over the plot so far. I will also add that in all the first versions, it is as if the elders of Zion are speaking. Yes, this is either written from their mouths or he stole the protocols. Therefore, to increase authenticity, the word not Jews is not written. You will soon see in different languages that it is written __ Gentiles. Meaning Goyi, Gentiles, as if Jews really were speaking among themselves. And that is how they wrote it. Not only that, but sometimes they introduce Talmudic language that is not so clear. It is not who knows what. If there are really gaps in the Talmud, they introduce eavesdropping from here and from there, that is, to increase authenticity again, as if these are the real protocols. Now, after we have presented what the plot is, we move on to the question of what they look like. I did not bring them this time because it seems to me that I showed you ugly Jewish characters last time. We also said that at the end of the story, we will address the question of what happened to the character. But it must be said that usually this is not a large publication. It is a booklet, say 60 pages, 70 pages, and many times much less than that is made. As we said, according to the elders, that is, there are meetings of 100 years, once a year, each elder reports what happened in the previous years and what will happen next. They discuss plans for the coming years. That is, each tribe has a chapter, and hence the details are usually 12 or 24 chapters long. This is the structure. There is an introduction. There are 12 or 24 chapters. And there are closing words. That is, the aspiration that reigns between David and Israel for a new repair, but this time not only for the land but for the whole world. It is with a heavy hand. And the temple, of course, will return and be built. Now, do we Still need to say something about the smell? Oh, we said that we will talk about the image. But about the compulsion. You usually remember that we saw one slide and I asked you to remember it. The earth is someone with a crown and a golden calf on his head and nails like these. Curved, holding a ball. A grip will be given and probably painful. On most of the protocols about the compulsion, there is the earth. There is a picture of the earth on which he sits or a road tendon with many legs on his forehead. He has a Star of David on his head. A kippa or a snake with its tail coming out is in the land and he is surrounding the earth and its head pointing back to earth, that is. When the whole thing is there, the snake will return. Or do you remember this bird of prey that attracted Rothschild's cold blood? One of these appears on the first edition, after the Hawks came to power in 1933. In short, the same figure that you saw is on the covers, even though we are dealing with a work from the modern era, not from the Middle Ages. And not with a religious background like the things we showed and talked about before. In any case, the same figure is on the covers as well. In the protocols that have recently been distributed in the Arab world, there are also such images, and some of them are harsh. And that's what we will talk about. So, the structure now, the content, what do the elders of Zion say to each other? How do they intend to destroy now? Each tribe is supposedly in charge of some area of life and society in the country they are in. For example, one is in charge of fostering communism and the Aryans, one is in charge of the collapse of the stock market and of playing with gold prices, one is in charge of taking over the media, one is in charge of fostering prejudice and corruption, one is in charge of digging underground passages or laying down railroad tracks, especially those of subways. This is the way in which it will be possible to blow up many subways at once in an hour. There was an explosion in Moscow towards the end of the 1960s and there was an explicit announcement that here is the plan. Music. Starting. We have also forgotten, of course, that one tribe that is in charge of revolutions has already successfully carried out the French Revolution and then he is carrying out the revolution again. I mean, again, this is after the first publication of the protocols. We will soon discuss the question of when and how they spread. But in any case, his next success is of course the Bolshevik Revolution. And he still has his hand outstretched. I mean, there is a plan. There is a touch on the world's prey points and there is a knowledge or understanding of the human soul as to how they will take over and how they will destroy so that there will be a kingdom of David. I will read to you only a few sentences. You remember, we talked last time about the fact that the protocols of the elders of Zion are not translated into Hebrew in their entirety, but there are excerpts here and there for the sake of study. And so, I will read to you only a few small excerpts. For example, the booklet, is usually full of tremendous contempt for the Jews and other nations who do not even realize what is happening under Haman and also the contempt of the arrogance of the chosen people who will one day rule the world. For example, the belief is barbaric in the first protocol and acts accordingly at every opportunity. As soon as the end achieves its freedom, it turns it into anarchy, that is, before us is an anti-democratic document in its essence that will be true, and anarchy in itself is the height of barbarity. Look at us, the hired animals, not even people, the hired animals, and the wine, etc., etc., by breaking in at an early age to which our Sunnis incited them, our martini, they art in the houses of the rich, we visited, etc., etc., by breaking in and corruption, it will be possible to take control of them, etc. You buried a short path in the circle of the symbolic snake, the emblem of our people, yes, the symbol of our people will be completed when this circle closes. All European countries are intertwined in it in chains without. And we could go on and on. This was from the third protocol up to here. What is the matter? How is it structured? How does it look? And how does it sound, more or less? In other words, eavesdropping here and there. Now, where does it come from? Not the background, but first the chain of events. And from the chain of events, it would be better to explain the background. Where does such a thing come from? That they say about it in Enkist Zinan. What is it? Where does it come from? Regarding the sources, I am only bringing you the main points of the matter, and this is because the researchers are still arguing among themselves about which source served more as the basis for the protocols. And we will not enter into the debate. There are all kinds of research innovations here. Every time I mention the main sources that are being argued about. First of all, in 186, he issues in France, although originally he was Italian. A man named Simone issues a letter. And in this letter, which is still called in research today the Simone letter, and he published it in all kinds of forms of publications. The press in 1806 only began her steps. But it is then rolled out in the press and as an appendix in all sorts of places, and he has a claim that the Jews want to take over the world. He still doesn't know anything about the Zionist Congress that will be held in 91 years, of course. But the Jews have a plan to take over the world, and they will do it with the help of the Freemasons, and the Freemasons themselves don't know that they will be used and are already being used as a tool of deception by the Jews. Here we need to open parentheses and ask who the Freemasons are and what the heavens are. And before the parentheses, it must be said clearly and unequivocally that the perfume and the Freemasons accompany the Jews as partners in all the protocols to this day, at great expense, whether in the communist world, which actually declared a boycott of the Freemasons, in Nazism, or in other places. The Freemasons were declared partners of the Jews, but what an irony! The Freemasons do not accept Jews into their services at all. And therefore, that is precisely why an organization called B'nai B'rith was established as a response. Yes, and the Freemasons do not accept Jews into their services at all. Wait, in the original, Okay. Gentlemen, no. Do you hear anything? Gentlemen? Well, let's calm down, gentlemen. In the beginning, and we're talking about 1806, when the Freemasons were around 100 years old. Maximum. That means their beginning was in England. And their most important base in Europe was in England at that time. They don't accept Jews. After that, another matter. We don't need to talk about it. Now, why are the Freemasons? Let's think. First, let's ask what they are. I mean, why are they actually suitable to be partners of the Jews in this matter? They are suitable because this is an order that is secret. It has an internal hierarchy. It has goals that are completely far-fetched, because it is a union with humanistic goals that set as its goal what is it that they build? What are they building? Every person needs to build himself and his qualities. A whole series of principles that need to be fulfilled. It is supposed to be very moral. To morally perfect a person's life. And there are also literally, but symbolically, of course, construction tools. There is a hierarchy. Who is entitled to possess which construction tool? And the ultimate goal is again, symbolically, to build Solomon's temple. Now, here is an organization that is suitable in every respect. It is secret. This hierarchy wants to build the temple. No one in the world knows what's there. Detectives. This is a very internal matter. It's like the Jews, who are also supposed to be a secret organization within internal hierarchy that tells others who it is and what it is. Here are some similarities. Here are two organizations that arouse deep suspicion. As the author of the final chapter says, this was in 1806. The result is that the Freemasons are mentioned in almost every edition as partners of the Jews. It doesn't matter that the most distinguished people in the world were or are members of the Masonic orders in their lodges, from Mazzini and Garibaldi in Italy to George Washington and Benjamin Franklin in the United States. The United States, by the way, is their great stronghold. When they counted them, or they counted themselves. In 1931, there were about 3.5 million of them in the United States and another 800,000 in Europe. But in the years of the war and after it, they suffered greatly from right-wing regimes that persecuted them, dismantled their lodges, and restricted their steps. Among the communist factions in Spain, the Iron Cross who in Romania didn't, and they suffered very badly in Europe, and their stronghold today is the United States, or after the war in any case they are partners, and we explained why after marking the next important landmark is a novel which is originally what we would call today a novel for maids. 1868, a book called Biarritz, and it was published by a German named Hermann Gadscha, and Gad that includes in his book a chapter. And the chapter title, or the chapter title in the Jewish cemetery in Prague. Surely a good number of you have been in Prague, or even come from there, and you are aware the ancient cemetery Sabbath is a place that really works a magic on you. This chapter in the book tells we are still before the Zionist Congress, that the elders of Zion gather, and at midnight Hillel. They are dressed in white. This is supposed to be, of course, exciting and dramatic and mysterious, and the elders of Zion gather at midnight, of course. And they have their say. The one who runs the whole thing is the head of the tribe of Levi, and he gives each of the elders his say, and he announces that again in a short time a kingdom will be completed, the destruction and the takeover will be complete. The destruction or the appeal is called in this literature that discusses the formation of the protocols. One is called the Samoni letter. One is called the rabbi's speech. It's not exactly a rabbi. It's a Rosh Shabbat, or an elder. But that's how it entered the literature. The rabbi's speech is the speech at the Jewish cemetery in Prague at midnight. Chapter 18 of the book. We move on and come to the 1990s, which bring us closer to the Zionist Congress. In the 1990s. In the 1990s, we say it in a big way. Yes, the Dreyfus trial was held. I won't go into detail. There was a trial and he was accused. Then there was an appeal. Then there was another trial. Then the whole Thing took many years. During these years, another text was created. They took a French play. A play by a French playwright. There is a dialogue. A dialogue called Dialogue in Sheol. Dialogue in Sheol in Nome. In it, Montesquieu, who of course represents democracy, liberalism, tolerance, argues and attacks his recipients, who are the tyrant princes, the sole rulers. And the intention is actually to attack Napoleon III, who is the ruler. That is to say, this is a political document, a first-class political document, a struggle between democracy in its infancy and regimes of one-man regimes. This is a matter of principle. But this play was taken by the secret police of the tyrant. So it was called Hoken. They take the play and change it and create a text. An initial text. It will go through many incarnations. An initial text in which it doesn't suit me. These are the Jews. I mean, the government and the advice. And the takeover. These are the Jews. And from there it develops further. They bring it to Russia. Tsarist Russia. Still. In 1903, the first text is published. It is called a plan. A plan for the conquest of the world by the Jews. It goes through another loss. In 1905, another version is called The Root of Our Problems. The Root of Our Problems. And then another one, which is really the text. That is later translated and changed and also changed. But it is the basic text. That year, 1905, that is, the protocols are 100 years old. Who is the average gens there between 1903 and this year? They protocols are 100 years old. This is an eccentric and a mystic man. A rather strange religion, but one that has great influence, unfortunately for the narrow end. Narrow court, takes the text and gives it a final loss and calls it the Antichrist, as an imminent political possibility, and in which you remember our Antichrist and his formation as the Jewish people against the brother-in-law of Christ, and therefore the Antichrist, as an imminent political possibility. I would like to put you on the subject of this composition. This is not again a religious document. This is a political document of the first order. It is also a document created during a period of increasing secularism and the weakening of the position of the Church. Therefore, I beg you not to attach to it any distinct religious elements that it does not have, and this is Sergei Nilus, who is a Orthodox clergyman, admittedly, but the Antichrist as a political possibility is used in which in other titles it is no longer called that. It is simply called the Zen, or in its translation into the various languages. Now, we will return to and we'll see what happens to the protocols in Russia as a result of all this and where they spread from Russia, but we're still in the story of their spread and we're summarizing their origins. A letter of reference with the Freemasons. The chapter in the book, A Romance for Maids with Midnight in Prague. Time of the Dreyfus trial. In which, of course, there's also another element of the Dreyfus accusation. Yes, it's clear that those who are preparing this text for Russia or taking it there are against Dreyfus and trying to be another nail in his coffin. And then those texts, 3 texts in Russia. Music, the narrower, after it became or after and after World War I, the text spreads from Russia to the West. Enough of all the opponents of the mouth. And it also spreads because there were internal sisters-in-law in Russia. We'll get back to the question of what they were doing there. Yes, and there were tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers there, and they brought the text to Japan. We'll talk about these too. But from there it continues and spreads east and west. It should be said that apart from Japan in the east, this text didn't catch on. It doesn't fit. Not to this day. India, China, these giant countries, and their surroundings. These are not countries. Anti-Semitism is not on their minds. They don't know to this day, it's not literature they're in. Japan, yes, and we'll come back and also clarify why in the West, of course, it reaches Germany. You see that in 1925, the R already has a completely solid opinion about them. And they are spreading to the United States as well. 1920, a key year in which the text is published in England by some tabloid called the Morning Star, but also by a respected newspaper like the Pilot. And Henry Ford in the United States that same year publishes his own version, which in 500,000 copies, is the first edition, called the International Jewish Edition. And he is who is here and who is there? They are also spreading, and there are struggles against them, which, as mentioned, we will get to now. That is, the 1920s, there is also a spread, we said, not so much to the east as to the west. The 1920s, also the first translations into Arabic, by which the Arab public explains to itself Zionism, where it came from, why it has power. It has no power in the 1920s, but that's how it is. And there is also a tendency to prove or, several cases of attempt to prove the forgery, the 1930s. Especially after the Hawks came to power, the book in Nazi Germany is a must-read. We have it in the Wiener and Techim Library for middle school children. It's a book with pictures, without pictures, with morel mushrooms, without morel mushrooms. It's a must-read. A must-read. And I'm reading to you what's written in the preface to the first edition of 1933, and you remember that bird of prey with the head of the names that led Rothschild to it? Every German has the duty to study the horrifying message of the elders of Zion. Their message in the first place. Yes, they admit in the protocols. They admit. And from there, to draw the right conclusions and to see that it reaches the hands of every German and German. We, the German peoples, the Germans, that is, the descendants of the Ottonian tribes, must thank the providence of the Greeks that awakened our paths at the exact moment when everything seemed lost. We must thank the supreme providence that awakened our paths at the exact moment when everything seemed lost, that is, the protocols are displayed off of danger, real danger, slow danger, and therefore, of course, one step is missing. If there is a danger, and now it has been exposed to everyone, everyone knows about it, then the question now is, of course, what do we do? And that is why the book is really called the first important research book that came out on Norman Cohen's protocols in Hebrew. It was already translated in the late 1960s. It was called in English, War for Genocide. And in Hebrew, it was translated as Authorization for Genocide, meaning Authorization for Genocide. That's what he called it anyway. Gentlemen, here we have more or less outlined the development and the development of the text. And now I need to ask two questions. Who are the partners, apart from the Freemasons? And first of all, what is the background? What is the explanation? Where does such a thing come from? Of course, there are several explanations for this. And as usual, I think the right way to understand something is not to isolate one historical factor and say that this is the reason, but rather all of them together. Things work in a broad context, not in isolation. First of all, it must be said that whatever your opinion, which is mine of course, on this plot, you must admit that it provides a simple, easy, black and white explanation that is understandable to everyone for everything that is happening in the world, like the same thing about God and the Antichrist. There is God and there is Satan, and whoever Satan supports, here too there is a very clear picture, although modern, although political and not religious, but it is absolutely clear. There is an organization, a connection, a conspiracy. He does his thing, he gathers, he is financed, he is Morgan, and he is advancing, and he does A, B, C, D, and H. I mean, you can use this simple story to explain things and of course take the burden of responsibility off yourself, to examine yourself, what was wrong with A, B, C, D, and H. Yes, no, you are the name, there is the name, it is simple, it is clear, it is equal to everyone, and it can also be adapted to more sophisticated ways, but the story is not. As Gannon says, of course, it is a simple story, it is a simple story. The second thing is that you notice, let's say that our Simon from the 16th century, we will leave it because it rolls over, then it continues with the Freemasons, and therefore we will not take the first half of the 19th century to discuss it, but the second half, we will take the second half and say, like this, what happens from the second half of the 19th century? Jews begin to receive emancipation as a community in various countries, and this is a process that is developing and going on. Although we already have Joseph II's letter of acquittal, which is the end of the 1st century, but in the 19th century, in the second half, Jews began to receive rights, both as a public, that is, as the right of a community to manage its affairs, and as private citizens, as individuals. And indeed, in the second half of the 1st century, they discovered, as is commonly said among the Jewish people, go and see it in the diaspora. When talking about the contribution of the Jewish people to world culture, there was a burst of creativity, theater, journalism, and there was nothing to talk about medicine, law, poetry, literature, politics, etc., etc., and also a number of Jewish families established themselves, which were, as we say, heavy in wealth and cattle, which allowed them political influence. The protocols are a response to emancipation. What does that mean? Of course, it is an exaggerated response. And the description of the Jews as if they were in every corner and taking over every area, and this is the basis of the story of the protocols, is completely exaggerated. Here a Jew succeeded, and here Sarah Bernard was, and here they were, and here please, but all the Jews became the slaves of the countries in which they live. This is an exaggeration. Wild, that's clear, but there were Jews who stood out and created this feeling that they stood out, that they were influential, and in fact we built it in private between non-Jews. They are not a slanderer. They are not. That is to say, yes, there is still a reaction here against a foreign body whose essence is foreign. The third thing is the fear of the modern. That is how we explain, for example, Ford's perception that we will soon reach the point where he apologizes to Deffer and tries to hunt down the 500,000 copies back. There is an expression here. This is a third element. Yes, we said one. The simplicity of the story, being equal for every soul and every event. The reaction to emancipation. And the fear of modernity or the modern. That is to say, the first century in the Union, its second half, is characterized by new ideological currents. Inventions, the linking of parts of the world, much more than in the period of discoveries and the beginning of colonialism. After them, there is a sense of progress in democratic science, the beginning of the democratization of life, of education. For every development of journalism, there is a feeling of change, especially in Western European countries. In Eastern Europe, it always comes a second generation later. But there is such a feeling and there is anxiety about it, especially there is anxiety of those bodies that are afraid of losing position and assets, whether it is a convex one because the world is going secular, whether these are the nobility classes because they will lose their position and we are already after the French Revolution and they are already losing or have already lost some of them, and in conservative circles, even in circles that are not partners in all this renewed activity, there is anxiety and a desire to find an explanation for themselves, who is for us and who is for us. What is happening and why, and not us, the heavens, that we are descending from our trials, we are perfectly fine, yes. It is not because our time has passed, but because there is a body that directs things, and so it is much easier to understand things and much easier even to accept them. Because it is not the fault of the person who died, we said as an additional element the period of the Dreyfus trial, that is. Here it certainly came into expression because during the Dreyfus trial, all the liberal forces of France and Émile Zola at their head came out in favor of Dreyfus. And they are Dreyfus and all the rest, the opposing camp is an Aryan anti-Dreyfus who wants to prove Shrief, as part of a Jewish conspiracy in general, was a spy against France. And caused it great damage, but not as a person or as a single officer, but within a broad framework of Jewish connections. And here you understand the context of the creation of the text during the Dreyfus trial. Of course, this also contributed to its own. And last, but not least, how did we say that the Jews in the 19th century were becoming secular, and they also had different ideological currents, and they also joined socialism and communism, and they also said about them that they were the fathers of socialism, and Boleslaw Schweitz, and so on. But still, the idea of a chosen people and the memory that the Jewish people see themselves as a chosen people still exists, and a chosen people. Do you remember what Hitler said? Yes, two peoples facing each other. Music. Here is a decisive battle for the fate of the world. Or are we the chosen people? Or are they the chosen people? And there is no room for two, and there is no room for compromise. The Jewish people's declaration of themselves, and it does not matter how many years or how many generations ago it was, its declaration of itself as a chosen people, also contributed to this. That is, to the story that says, what can a chosen people want? Not satisfied with this prayers he wants rule he wants world rule he wants a temple he wants a kingdom in David he wants to be the chosen people but elected to rule from all the elements gentlemen if you put them together the atmosphere of the period the atmosphere of the Second half of the first, the anxiety about expressions, the anxiety imposed by the French Revolution and the terrible atrocity it caused, and the Napoleonic coup later. All this imposed anxiety, and she looks at the protocols of the elders of Zion. Now who are they? Partners. From what we said, it is quite clear that anyone can pair Jews with another partner. And why is that so? That is why you can take protocols. You are welcome to come to the Wiener Library, it will reopen, but maybe in the meantime we also did a small exhibition. Why is it possible that everyone in every protocol has another partner? Me another introduction, because many of the protocols do not have copyrights. There is no father, there is no one who really wrote, because after all it is the elders of Zion who wrote. Yes, these are their protocols. The publisher only publishes their words, and therefore you cannot imprint it on anything, and therefore he is also allowed to change the walls of his eyes and his soul's affection. And therefore what happened is more or less like this: the Russian aristocracy, which had lost its assets, accused the Bolsheviks of being partners with the Jews. The Bolsheviks gave the partners to the capitalists, of course. The capitalist Jews, the world capitalists in the United States, infected the Jews with the communists, because they were of course against the police of the United States. The Freemasons are in everything. This is clear, and so on and so on. The Jesuits named the Jesuits. Yes, those who were clearly anti-religious named the Jesuits as partners with the Jews. And so there are different versions that look at the introduction. Later, the text is more or less as we said, but the introduction can be like this. And the closing remarks are also about the question of who the partners are and what the background is. Now I would like to give you some examples. You really need nerves for these examples, because things are really so absurd. But what can you do? And this book, again, is that the public that was most affected by this pamphlet has not read it and is not reading it, and therefore it seems to them that it has blossomed. I just want to tell you that today, at 1:45, I have an idea. I'm on the phone with a journalist from Greece, because a new edition of the protocols has just come out there, and there's a lot of anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish propaganda there, whatever you want. And this is the latest edition that we're talking about, as of a week ago. The question of examples is, I'll choose from a few periods. We'll start with the first one. Why? Because it gave the first push to spread. Do you remember Sergei Nilus, that religious eccentric, a cleric who has a great influence on the court of sorrows, and he brings his text? Do you remember the Antichrist, as a promising political option? He brings it to the court. The narrow one reads and his eyes light up. The narrow one says, he testifies about himself. He testified later. You know what happened to him in the revolution, but he testifies about himself, and his eyes light up. Why didn't there happen to be the Russo-Japanese War? You remember at the beginning of the century, and it takes a few years, and the situation is after a few long months of fighting. The situation is more or less a certain tycoon. And then the Japanese government or the regime in Japan actually takes a loan from the Schiff family, the Schiff family. The hoteliers were the Jewish woman who also had a ballet bar. And the Schiff family lent them a sum that in those days was legendary, some £3 million. And the Japanese are not lazy, arming themselves well and setting up the Russians, the narrow and the poor. what is the name of it, and that his corrupt regime, the delusion of his soldiers, was not full of sand. And in winter he was not clothed, and so on and so forth. Schiff, a Jewish family with her money, tilted history, and expressed his downfall, and he and then the narrow read the book, and both of them together are present at the reading of the text in all the churches of Moscow. There were then over 36,360. And how many churches in Moscow on the following Sunday, that is, in 1905, the text received a sanction from above, they read it and discuss it, and it begins to roll. Now, what happened in Japan? We will finish Japan up to the present day, and then we will return to other examples. Japan, we said that there were Japanese soldiers there from the time of the war. And they bring the protocols with them south. After that, there are several translations and the years go by, nothing happens in terms of protocol, in terms of Jews in Japan, more or less. But World War II comes and Shanghai, which was a national air base, can be reached. If there is one, and it was not originally so difficult to obtain, but they come and receive a visa from one of the four powers that distributed the Shanghai line. There are other layers of Jews there. First, Jewish merchants from Iraq, mainly who carried the Silk Road in previous centuries. Jews who fled the Bolshevik Revolution, and Jews who come from Austria, Germany, the Czech Republic in 37 to 38. They are joined by a final wave of several thousand Jews from Lithuania who managed to escape just before the war, before Germany invades the Soviet Union. In short, there are about 20,000 Jews there. All kinds of Jews. The Germans come and ask Japan, which is their ally in the war, right? They Rome-Tokyo-Berlin Axis, the three Axis powers, ask them to hand over these Jews to them, because that's how I mean, they are now responsible for the Jewish ghetto. The Jews sat here. There really is a protocol. No, it's not that Kenny Zion is sitting. The government in Japan is sitting on the podium. And she doesn't know what they're talking about. I mean, why do they Jews need to be extradited? Who are these guys? And they bring up one of the translators of the protocols into Japanese. Yo here is confident that he knows something when it comes to Jews. And he explains protocols to them and arranges things. And then they say more or less like this. Why are they a practical Japanese brain? If they are so strong and organized, plotting and financed, let's go against them and close them to the Germans. They will remember this to the last one of them. We will arrange for them our own ghetto. And there were territories in China. There was a ghetto in Japan. It takes time, and it goes through several incarnations. It doesn't matter. But there is a ghetto in Japan where life was not honey, but there was no abuse, no beatings, and no hard labor. It is certainly not a stage before being sent to some camp. This is the story of the protocols in Japan, but it has a continuation in the 1980s in the second half. In the 1980s, a renewed postponement of the Japanese protocols took about 10 years. Now it's over. After 1995, it's over. And the thing is that the Japanese economy and the United States economy were at the beginning of a very tough competition. The Japanese accused the Jews, who were behind the United States, of destroying Japan's economy. Hence, the short way to revive the protocols was someone named Adam Mellum. Unfortunately, in Japan, those who reissued the protocols in the 1980s and 1990s were people with first-class, respected academic status. The explanation is that perhaps they simply didn't know who Jews were or what Judaism really was, in terms of the history of Judaism. But in their places, they would study heavy women. And one of them was a great journey to save the world, and 18 million people would die from it. We had a conference last week. There was a lecture by Professor Marheath, who lived in Japan for 10 years, exactly those 10 years. 855, and others had success and were also determined. The date 1995 was supposed to be the date of the Elders of Zion. Zionism would first take over Japan as stage 1 and then gradually go forward, but in 1995 nothing happened. And it is a bit shameful to set a different date, and why? Is there a decline in this issue, and I would like to address this issue in my closing remarks, and why do the Japanese have anything to do with the protocol of the Elders of Zion, the House of David, and the Temple? And also, remember that Japan has good relations with Israel, and there is an embassy, and there is the Mekoya sect that came and sang, and so on, and so on. It is not that suddenly 10 years ago Japan became anti-Semitic. God forbid. Another example is that there are students here. Some of them were probably in South America. In South America, the variation of the protocols is called Plan Ednia. Plan Dina, the Andean plan. I mean, it was founded a long time ago. I mean, this plan is long ago. It was published a long time ago. I mean, I would say that it has been around for about 20 years, and if you pay attention, these 20 years are more or less parallel to the time when Israeli backpackers take their backpacks and walk around across all of South America, and the plan says that if there is Christianity in Israel and somehow we don't manage to come to an agreement with our neighbors, Israel takes over and wants to take over its pathogens in the southern region of the country. Gentlemen, music. All those who were in South America will exchange experiences. After that, wait a minute, in the meantime I'll have a drink. And those who brought Russia are the spies who come to patrol the country. Next I'll give 2 or 3 more examples, but you definitely understand the principle. A doctorate that came out in the Soviet Union in the 1970s is really chapters and chapters of it. A doctorate that was approved. Yes, it's good. The doctorate of no. What's his name from Syria? He also sings in Moscow. Okay. Anyway, I'm quoting a newspaper in the Soviet Union, quoting the doctorate. The Zionist concern is Sunni. They Sunnis are Freemasons. Yes, a sick mess of 80% of the world economy and 9.5% of the media, and so on and so on. The 1970s that changed the narrative. The Soviet Union's holdings are in the nation, and within this framework, it is within the framework of the support it gives for third world countries. And many countries in this framework, the UN also accepts the decision Zionism is equal to the gardens. These years are also the years of the brittle distribution of the protocols on behalf of South America, the Arab countries in the Soviet Union, and here we brought Plan Dina. And also the Zionist concern from Sunnis. In Saudi Arabia, it was customary for many years recently that a distinguished guest, a guest of the state, does receive the protocols in a red velvet binding and as a gift. And it started to come out of the confession when we gave one to Kissinger, who is Jewish. First, we gave it to Foreign Minister Michel Joubert. Nothing happened. It passed peacefully. Only the feedback from his entourage that he received put it in a file. Woke up and returned it. Kissinger, of course, made a big scandal and it went down, but you still probably read that the new library in Alexandria has just opened. Right? It is in a place on the shelf called Jewish Holy Books. They put the Protocols of the Elders of Zion as a holy book as one of the writings of the Jews. And that too caused a big scandal. Until they took it down. A final example. I could go on and on, gentlemen, but I would like to talk about the trials that were held to answer the question of what to do and the question of the character that arises from them. A final example that you have surely heard of is the series in Egypt, A Horseman Without a Horse, a series that has now been aired for a year. The previous Ramadan began when people were sitting at home in the evenings. This series, in several episodes, basically told the story of a family. Yes, but how the elders of Zion, who rule by the strings, influence its fate, influence the fate of Egypt, of the world, etc., etc. And to say it more, for the Arab Brotherhood. Another series on the Al Mana network from Lebanon also released a series centered on the blood libel. There is actually a real name for it. It is recommended to watch. There is now a big legal battle in France to prevent its release. In the meantime, it is being screened. I mean, until the screening stops and there is an episode. It is not so much about the protocols as about the libel of a man. There is a scene of rabbis slaughtering a Christian child. Oh, and it is really, really hard to watch them and think that this is what millions of people you see. The second series, as mentioned, is not directly about the protocols, but it involves them. Meaning it involves this element of rule by rule. Here I want to end the series and the examples on the following matter. Today, I mean, the beginning of the 2000s. A little less protocols are published. Here we said in Greece a week ago. They are still published. They are in all languages and in every corner. But it should be said that where it is impossible to publish them, you can always say, not necessarily directly, the protocols that the elders of Zion, the Zionist Congress, and so on and so forth. You can talk about a global Jewish connection, about a conspiracy, about a government. There are even acronyms for this. They came out of Sweden. This is gas stones. That is, there is a world government. You can give it different variations and nuances. It is not proven to say protocols, but to continue the idea in different forms. Now, what do we do? First of all, hello, this is a fake document. And this is a document. That is not, it is not what it claims to be. First of all, back in the 1920s, the first one would say in praise of the Times newspaper, a respected newspaper to this day that did publish it as if it was true because someone translated Nilu's text and brought it out as a truly authentic document. A Times reporter got it in a hurry. He was a reporter in a hurry. He got it by chance. You remember the play between Montesquieu and the forgery that forged it, that is, the changes. He got this text with the markings. The text was completely by chance. The original text with the markings. And he goes to the Times editorial office and says, "Gentlemen, this is nonsense from a sample. First-rate nonsense. And here you have it. The Times disavows itself, and other respected newspapers follow suit, such as the Frankfurter Zeitung, which Hitler quotes and says, there was no society and it was not created. We apologize. A mistake. A mistake. Ford Hodge. We said that in 1920, two Jews from the United States immediately sued him and said, he is harming our good name. They took him to court and he was forced to retract it. He also apparently apologized sincerely after he understood the meaning. He apologized. He is trying to find the 500,000 copies back, but go run after them. Throughout the United States in any case here was a precedent, also a precedent of newspapers, also a precedent of a court. In 1934 again Jews, the Jewish community actually in South Africa drowns and wins. 1934-5 the community D in Bern in Switzerland sues and then it is a real trial with implications with international coverage. Weizmann testifies, all Sokolov, all the greats of the Jewish people appear condemning this matter and the distribution this 345. Yes, it is the distribution of protocols from Germany to Switzerland. The Jewish community drowns, wins the trial, and not only that, but there is a determination made that has a historical value said after. Yes, that the details are political pornography, that means they are disgusting. And the trial of course that distribute the protocols in other places, that is the Swiss can only prohibit their distribution in Switzerland, can slander them and prohibit the distribution in Switzerland and no other place. Other places said the of course the shop in the Bern trial were of course this is still this trial certainly has great value. 1964 a committee of the American Congress investigates the protocols and all their trappings and writing a text about everything we said today and much more than that, because they want to separate the United States struggle against communism from the Jews. That is a very nice Cold War struggle, but it is directed only against the Soviet Union and Jews are not involved in it, as if they are like the protocols. You remember we said that they were dismantled and published in the Bar of the Covenant. The Jews' partners. Are they communists? It is not. And the committee also publishes a very significant and enlightening report. And I can go on and end with this. In the 1990s, the decade preceding this dismantling, the 1990s, was a dismantling of a lot of legislation in Europe because, as you know, the communist bloc fell apart. Globalization began. There are waves of immigrants. We will discuss this at the last meeting. And there is a whole question of legislation that concerns foreigners and immigrants who are not immigrants but foreigners who are at your gates. What are the rights of a foreign worker, an immigrant, a refugee, someone who seeks political asylum, and Jews in general? That means minorities. And legislation is beginning. And it must be said that today there are already 12 countries in Europe, which has a law against anti-Semitism, against Holocaust denial, and against anti-Semitic publications. Not each of the laws has the three components, but together, yes, and the protocols are among the documents that are prohibited from publication in many countries. This is also one of the reasons why it is impossible to publish in Israel, because what we have issued for this, we are worried that they will publish them somewhere else. On the other hand, despite the legislation, there is a big problem. There are two directions. One is the countries of the former Eastern Bloc, which finally, after years of being suffocated under communism, have freedom of speech and now Everything can be published. So now they do not agree. I mean, in the Czech Republic there was also a trial and it did not come out in favor of the Jewish side because the statement was that finally there is freedom and freedom of speech. People have their eyes in their heads. They knew what was ahead of them. It is impossible. It is impossible to return to prohibitions and repression again. So this is one mindset. The second issue is the gentleman of the Internet. What does the Internet care if there is a law in this country or another? You can log in today. Come home. Even the biggest and most respected servers have already had 2 cases, and in one of them, the Idiot League came out in a call to him. It was not Google or anyone else who would take the voices off the site, but the ADL immediately qualified itself because the ADL is not willing to harm freedom of speech, which is sacred in the First Amendment to the American Constitution, and does not want to go against freedom of speech. Then he said, if you will, it will be. But it will be written below that this is political pornography and that this is first-class nonsense that has not been and will not be found, etc., etc. Well, gentlemen, on the Internet, there is the possibility of setting up a site to put whatever you want until they reach you. There are options today to limit distribution. Yes, and to prohibit entry to sites, but it is complicated. The legislation is in its infancy. At the time, President Clinton refused to sign a law that would limit a comprehensive law that would limit, and therefore here there is open ground, and again, the protocols are quite freely available to them. Now, what happens to our figure? The crucifixion of the Antichrist, Sergei Milos. We said, he said, Antichrist, but there is really no religious dimension to it. Some detail, you might say, the people chose. There is no religious dimension. The second moment, one was the crucifixion, the second was the election. The election, of course, is the people. The chosen one is his will to rule. The character, on the other hand, has received physical innovations. This is the same character that we showed on the covers of the protocols. On the covers, it's the same thing. The snake with the terrible bird. The claws are sharp. The earth suffers many times. The claws are really stuck in the globe and blood drips from them. This external character is alive and well. But first of all, you have to say this. Look at what it means. What it means about Jews. It means, and here, it definitely goes beyond the Middle Ages and it discusses the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. What it means is that if it means that the Jews are a joint organization, yes, that they have a plan and they say, this tribe will be communist and this tribe will be anti-capitalist and this tribe will do this and this tribe will do that. That means that Jews don't really believe in anything. That means that they don't. They're not really committed to the idea of ideology. And it was created at a time when Jews are sacrificing themselves for ideologies and for joining ideologies and for the improvement of the world. This document more or less says that Jews really don't believe in anything because what they believe in is their organization, their plan, and their ultimate goal, but they are not really partners in the ideologies they lead or join or try to promote. The second thing is that it unequivocally says that Jews are not truly wholehearted citizens of their countries because exile is only part of the plan. Yes, they are not citizens. They are exiles who came to settle in this or that place and continue to do what they are supposed to do. But they are not. Not only do they not take part in the life of the place, but they intend to undermine the place and undermine its characteristics, and then, when it is sufficiently destabilized, take over and so on. I mean, A. They do not believe in B. They are not really citizens. And in this respect, in both respects, this document casts a terrible stain on the Jewish people because, as he said, I go back to the quote from Hitler at the beginning. What are the protocols that this people lives in? Or is it all one big lie? I mean, everything you see from the outside as a citizen who wants human rights, who lives in a place, a person who supports an ideological movement and is an idealist and so on. No, all of this simply does not exist. And therefore, gentlemen, let's say that there is something else. I mean, more. Let's say one more difference, one more nuance in the character. We said that in the Middle Ages, especially since Augustine developed his doctrine of the Edo, that is, to ask for a translation into a translation lest they forget my people, and they must be in a low state from a religious, practical, political, and so on, so that the righteousness of Christianity will constantly come to light and the difference or the enormous gap between them will not stand, then a character developed that is characterized by that political weakness, that is characterized by the lack of rights, that is characterized by being a ball of play between the church, you remember, and the rulers. Divorces, robbery of their money, level of property, and so on and so on. That is, a body that has nothing to defend itself with, and it is the lowest level of human rights in the Middle Ages, unless you also take the main ones, which are also not satisfied, but this is a special status, it is special in the deliberate humiliation, the protocols come and present a completely different character. Yes, and therefore I say this is a modern painting. It is not the Middle Ages, and not even the late Middle Ages. It is already a completely different position of the image of the Jew as a powerful organization plotting against you. Remember, he doesn't leak, etc., etc. This is a completely different image. And this is an image that poses a very personal danger. You remember that we talked after the Mel Gibson movie, and also when we saw the image in the middle waters with the devil, even then, even immediately after the crucifixion of Jesus, you need power to crucify God. We said, you need some kind of ability. You need a goal. Even after that, in the Middle Ages, you strive for something. If you have an alliance with the devil, you can do things. I mean, the idea of Jewish power and Jewish organization is actually at the roots of things all the time, but in this form of political power, of an organization, of a congress of leadership. Of course, after that, the Zionist Congress, the center of the Elders of Zion, has been in Jerusalem since 1948. It's clear that this is a figure with power, and a figure with power needs to be held accountable. She's dangerous. We'll end with a story about two Jews who are traveling in their grandfather's car in New York, and one is reading a newspaper called Hunzik or whatever, and the other is reading Gestapo Sands, which is a newspaper for Nazis in the United States. And so it happens openly. So one says to the other, Moishi, what happened to you? That's how everyone sees you. Such a beautiful newspaper. Moishi says, listen. You read your Hauser-Zeit. They. Jewish organizations fight with each other. Mixed marriages are eating us up. Soon there won't be a Jewish community here. Israel is always in trouble. I read their newspaper. We control the media. We control the banks. We'll do everything. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. No, you can't. J.A. 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 J.A.